good evening y buenas noches. I'm Amy Posada.
And I am Chelsea Valenzuela Cooper, and we want to welcome you to Amigas Unplugged.
Awesome. So if you're watching us on Facebook or any other streaming platform, make sure to like and to follow.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe.
Please, 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 guys, share our podcast with your friends and family. We would really appreciate it.
And if you want to win some free merch, surprise goodies, or gift cards in the future, share our YouTube video with the hashtag Amigas Unplugged or tag 5 friends or family in this chat. Last month, we gave away our custom Stanley tumbler. Did I just say that right? I said it wrong.
Yeah.
The cup, the Stanley Cup, that was laser engraved with our logo and cartoon graphic of Amy and I. You could be our next winner. So remember, guys, share this video with everyone.
Awesome. Okay, well, hello to everyone that's watching on YouTube and Facebook Live. And just so you know, guys, like today's episode has arrived, and honestly, I have been feeling pretty nervous about it. I've been a little bit of a wreck. I've been talking to Chelsea about it just because for today's hot topic, we will be discussing the 2024 primary election results in Texas and what it says about the upcoming general election in November of 2024. Now, the race that we will be, I guess, covering or targeting today is Congressional District 23 in Texas. So Texas Congressional District 23, which is 66% Hispanic and historically a purple district, but has been held and carried by Republicans since 2015. So 9 years to date. For today's episode, we will be touching on some local and state races as well, but we will share those with you as we go along. Now, before I move on, I do want to take note of these other congressional races in Texas because I think they're going to be incredibly important this year. I think it's going to be an indicator of how Hispanics and Latinos are going to vote in the future, maybe where our values are starting to align more. So we will discuss these races later on this year on the podcast before the general election. Okay, and those races are Texas Congressional District 34, which is 91% Hispanic, and historically has been a pretty blue district, but it did turn red during a special election in 2022. The other district is Texas Congressional District 15, which is 81% Hispanic and historically has been a dark blue district, but it did turn red in the 2022 general election, but it was blue for 121 years. Chelsea, take the floor.
So, election night was spicy all over the state. But to Amy's point earlier about being nervous about talking about this is talking politics is scary, right? It's not PC. And talking politics at a primary level is even scarier because some folks are wild and take it to outer space. No, I'm just kidding. They take it completely. They take it elsewhere, and it is a wild, wild west Texas edition. So we're gonna hit on some congressional races, and we're gonna hit on some local level stuff.
Yeah, so these are just my thoughts before we go into the congressional race that we're targeting and then the other races. I just want to make this very clear to guys, this is why it is so important that you vote. Obviously, our target audience is Latinos, Hispanics, but everyone should be voting. It doesn't matter if you are conservative, but you only care about general elections. It doesn't matter if you are a moderate Republican and you don't like any of the options in the primary. It doesn't matter if you are center right and you never vote in primaries. You absolutely need to vote because what we are seeing is that there are candidates who make it to the general and they do not represent the majority of their constituents. They essentially represent these extreme agendas. Now, the reason why local Republican Party, the county parties or even just in general, the Republican primary results are not a good representation of the overall population is because it's typically, again, we're speaking out of experience, the most crazed, the most passionate, the most devoted, which is not a bad thing. And from my experience, right, the most extreme folks are the ones who vote in primaries and the ones who get involved in the local party. And that's why sometimes we are left in November like, why are these the only two options, right? Like, how did we get here?
How did this happen?
And well, I'm, sorry guys, but it is because of people like you who didn't want to vote in primaries. And this is also why it is hard to get involved and stay involved in your local county party or even in state parties, because people are literally nuts. It is, like Chelseay said, it is the Wild West. It is just, people are like, people talk sometimes and you're like, did you actually say that? But they're extreme. And I have spoken about this before, but the GOP and its leadership can be really out of touch with views and beliefs that are outdated. And if you disagree with them, you're a rhino, right? And if you don't know what that means, a rhino means Republican in name only, which is why sometimes when a local party like endorses a certain candidate, I'm like, I don't know about that. And I'm going to say this, and I'm only speaking from experience. County parties and state parties do not represent the average voter. They don't even represent the average Republican or Democrat. The parties get more and more extreme each year, and something needs to be done. So guys, please vote. You don't have to get involved if you don't want to, right? But please vote. If you identify more conservative, vote in your Republican primary. If you identify more liberal, vote in your Democrat primary. Just please vote. But Chelseay, let's get into Congressional District 23.
Okay, so let's hyper-focus on Texas 23 really quick. Texas 23 went into a runoff so it's the incumbent, Tony Gonzalez, and then the YouTuber, Brandon Herrera. Please don't get mad at me, guys. And just share with you the results. This is what it looks like. So Tony came in at 45.1% with 25,943 votes. Brandon, obviously they're going into a runoff. He was right behind him. Well, not actually right behind him. 14,190 votes at 24.7. There was Julie Clark, Frank Lopez Jr., and Victor Avila below them. Really not noteworthy. Sorry, no disrespect. But what is noteworthy is, out of all these candidates in this race, nobody outperformed Tony in any county in Texas. And you guys can look this up. This is based on numbers.
Right.
Another note from this race is that the incumbent Congressman Gonzalez was censored in several counties throughout the state of Texas, based on how he was voting in Congress. However, he was still able to outperform every other candidate and performed very well. He didn't get over the finish line. Obviously he didn't. That's going into a runoff. Came very close. Something that I also want to note in this race that happens a lot in the primaries is the specific party will push a candidate that won't necessarily be able to make it through a general election. So in this case, Congressman Gonzalez against Brandon Herrera. I don't know Brandon Herrera, so there's no disrespect to him or anything like that. But let's just say, hypothetically, he beats Tony in the runoff in May. I'm willing to bet money the seat is lost in November. The chances of Brandon winning in general are slim. He's not a strong candidate. I think the big issue is the fact that people put on blinders when it comes to viability. You have to think long term. You have to think numbers. You have to think fundraising. You have to think big picture. You got to put your feelings aside, because you really at the end of the day, is this a viable race? Can they make it in the end? And I firmly believe that a lot of people voted with their feelings and not facts. And that is why we are seeing this race into a runoff.
Yeah, no, and so I'm going to talk about some of my thoughts on Tony's race, and Chelseay, I'm going to get your feedback on a lot of these points that I make. But as previously mentioned, so this is actually my first point. 66% of Tony's district is Hispanic, and this is something we talk about often. Actually, like if you're like a Hispanic or Latino Republican, at least I have these conversations with other Hispanic and Latino Republicans. I recently spoke about this with a colleague who is from the RGV. He's Latino, he's young, he votes Republican. And we were talking about how Latino Republicans will see things such as the border crisis, right, claiming asylum, even gun control very differently than white Republicans. Whether that's because we are immigrants ourselves or because our parents are immigrants or whatever the case is, our views will be different. And I've noticed that it's like two extremes. We are either much harder on the immigration issue than white people, or significantly more, let's say, lax and understanding and flexible. And typically it's the latter, right? And you and I were talking about this earlier, Chelseay, right? Yes, here in El Paso, we do have these very loud and vocal, what I call these anti-immigration activists, or not even anti-immigration, just anti-illegal immigration activists. That's fine. But for the most part, your typical independent, even center right voter in El Paso, they tend to have this really deep compassion, right, for I guess for these migrants, right? There's a deeper sense of empathy and sympathy as like a Latino towards these migrants. And actually, I'm going to have Joelle pull up a graphic that was circulating on my Facebook feed recently. Now, if you are listening on audio and you cannot see the graphic, essentially it is a picture of about 25, 30 guys that are lined up on the floor, lying on their bellies in a position to shoot their rifle. They're all facing the same direction. And the graphic says, "This is what our southern border should look like." Now I just want you guys to take a quick look at this, and I'm not sure if you guys feel as icky as we do, but it's just, you know, having worked in this district, having seen and spoken with thousands, right? Because people are like, oh, I hung out with, you know, I spoke with a migrant the other day on the sidewalk. I have been in the centers. I have been in these like detention centers, not just here in the US, but in Mexico. I have spoken to thousands of migrants. When I think of the border crisis, yes, of course, I think drug traffickers, human traffickers, sex traffickers, weapons traffickers, these criminals, right? Of course you think of that, right? Because and of course I'm going to think that because there are a good chunk of people that are coming over that fit that profile. But what I honestly think of when I think of the border crisis is the kids, is the women mm-hmm. who left their kids in the desert, who threw their kids across the wall, who have done crazy things, who had to sell their children into like this slavery so that they could make it into America. It's just the saddest stories that you will ever hear. And so I don't know. When I think of these migrant kids coming, I think, you know, when I see this graphic, I think of these kids, right? And so, Chelseay, what do you think?
So I'm right there with you. I think that, first off, I don't agree with that meme or graphic. I think it is in bad taste, and I'm going to tell you why. Because like Amy, you know, I'm 100% for illegal immigration. I believe that we have a crisis at the border and it needs to stop. But what I'm not for is killing people. I'm for life. I mean, and maybe I feel differently because I'm from Uvalde and born and raised in Uvalde versus, let's just say, San Antonio. It is a different, you see the border issue differently. In San Antonio, you don't really feel it, maybe some crime, whatever. In Uvalde, there's bailouts all the time. And I'll go as far as including this. Everybody knows what happened in Uvalde, the shooting, the horrible event, can't forget it. On that day, when they had the lockdown, the teachers, didn't think it was anything super serious because lockdowns are so common because they happen when there's bailouts, and there's a bailout almost every single day.
Right.
So I think I do view the border crisis a different way, but in terms of just circling back to that picture, I think it's disgusting. I am for life. I don't think it's funny to joke about killing people. I don't think it's funny when people say, oh, we're going to shoot the illegal immigrants. You're what? No, you're not. And, you know, like Amy said, there are people who have to throw their children, you know, over the border and hope for the best. I mean, and Amy, let's go back in time. Do you remember in El Paso when we were talking to the what was it? Those agents at Lloyd's, and they were telling us that they had just seen, you know, kind of the most horrific stuff, like just babies in the desert and people just dropping their children over the gate. So yeah, guys, that kind of stuff is not funny, and it is distasteful in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's funny because it actually goes right into the next point, which is about this district, right? So the first point was that 66% of this district is Hispanic. The second point being this district has 40% of the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm going to repeat that. 40% of the U.S.-Mexico border, literally almost half of the U.S. southern border is in this one district alone. So it is an incredibly sensitive and insanely huge issue for people who live here, right? And it's going to be different, right? If you live in San Antonio, that's really, of course, you're going to be passionate about it because you're seeing it on the news, right? On Fox or CNN. But it's different for people who live in Uvalde, who live in Sierra Blanca, who live in Presidio, who live in, Fort Hancock, who
Eagle
live
Pass,
in,
or...
Fort Davis, in Van Horn, and in Eagle Pass. Exactly. Yeah. And so, and I'm saying this as someone who has actually worked as a congressional staffer in this district. The next congressman has to be willing to compromise on border issues. And I'm not saying, right, like, okay, just let the floodgates come up. No. It's there has to be this common sense. You have to be reasonable, right? Like, for example, like if you think the Republican Party as a whole has the solutions that work for this border crisis, or in general to fix because our immigration system really is broken, you are wrong. Now, if you think the Democrat Party as a whole has the solutions, you are wrong. In addition to that, you need a congressman who is heavily invested in CBP, Border Patrol, local and state law enforcement, and either has the experience working with them, inside of those organizations, or has experience in those matters. You need a congressman who is well versed in international policy and laws. And I'm going to throw a little bit of shade to Brandon. If you go on his website, and the very first thing he mentions is like, oh, he wants to end these phony asylum claims. It is international law, buddy. People have a right to claim asylum. I mean, it's basic. This is so basic. You can Google this. You don't even need a degree yet. It's on your website. So you need someone who is well versed in international policy and laws and knows the history of U.S. and Mexico relations alongside that border. Now, right now, only one candidate is the one who has that experience, and it's Tony. The only one who has established those relationships is Tony. The only one in this race who has been endorsed by 15 sheriffs in his district, in addition to several local law enforcement and unions and organizations, is Tony. And that experience is needed to fix the mess that this congressional district is in. And I'm just speaking out of personal experience. Okay. Now, Chelseay, I know you mentioned it. You were born and raised in Uvalde, which is heavily impacted by migrant chases, bailouts, pretty much everything in between. How do you think, do you think that maybe being from that area, do you feel like people there are a little bit more compassionate? Or because here in El Paso, of course, people are going to be compassionate because we have this big, beautiful wall, right? We have this big, beautiful wall. Yes. Joel and I bumped into a migrant at Olive Garden the other day who literally just crossed over, and was trying to find his way to the airport. So yes, we do encounter that all the time, but it's not like we have bailouts, right? Our schools aren't really being shut down. They're being used as migrant centers, to be fair, right? And yes, there are migrant chases, but it doesn't impact really our daily life. It's an everyday issue for us. Of course, it is a huge problem, but I think that's why there's a little bit more compassion here than there would be in places like, right, Eagle Pass, or, even places like, West Texas, Sierra Blanca, Fort Hancock, Fort Davis, because it's just, every part of this district is so complex. So do you think being from Uvalde, people are less compassionate, more compassionate? What are your thoughts on
I think they're
that?
absolutely less compassionate, but that is, I don't blame them.
Right.
I mean, when I tell you they happen so often and it's a problem, it's caused deaths, it's caused accidents,
Right.
There, just to give you, I actually have a really good story about this, but I'm gonna save it for our episode that is strictly about immigration. But I will say this: last summer we were coming back from Chalk Bluff, if you know, and we were on 90. So if you're from Uvalde, Highway 90, right? We're on Highway 90. There are troopers, there are Uvalde PD, all this stuff. Tell me why there was a bailout happening right in front of us on Highway 90, and it was like nothing, like all these illegals just jumping out and almost causing an accident. And if you've ever been on 90, it's a little bitty road sometimes. I mean, it's not little, but it's not big. It's not San Antonio roads. Right. So I think that, to get back to your question, are people in Uvalde less compassionate? Yeah, but they have every right to be.
Right.
They see it every day. I mean, Uvalde is a little speck on the map. It's the chases happen through Main Street. You know what I mean? But then you have these people in, like, let's just say San Antonio, that are not as impacted, but they feel the most passionate about it, I say,
Right.
because they're the loudest, which I think is kind of funny, because it's like, hey, buddy, this has never happened to you.
Right.
But, back to what you were saying, the next congressman needs to have connections and relationships to know what is going on and how to fix these things. There's always going to be something. And, no shade to Brandon, but that's not him. Regardless of what you think of Tony, your feelings, you don't like him, you hate him, you think he's a big fat rhino. Tony, I didn't just say you were fat. You think he's a rhino. He does the work. Outside of election season, that man is everywhere. Everywhere. So come on, guys.
Yeah. And so the next point that I'm going to bring up, which might actually annoy some people, is that this is a historically purple district. That is a big fat fact. It is now 7 points in favor of Republicans after redistricting, but all it takes, guys, is for one really bad, or what I call extreme Republican candidate, to ruin this win streak for Republicans. Now, from my personal experience, yes, we have a lot of Republicans. We clearly have a good amount of Democrats, but we have so many independent, moderate, or center-right voters in this district, some of who will not vote for a hard Republican. Now, a lot of people think that this district is very bright red, but it's absolutely not. And I personally believe, just from my experience, right, not just campaigning and speaking with Republican voters, but working as a congressional staffer. And, because when you're a congressional staffer, guys, you don't just handle Republican stuff, right? You work for the government. You are so not biased, right? You are very objective. It doesn't matter if a hard socialist Democrat calls you and has an issue with a government agency. You are to help them. You are to care for them. You are to advocate for them with everything that you have. And so, it's just, there's so many people that they want to moderate, right? And this is just from my experience. I had a very specific region in the district, but I do believe that Brandon could be the person to ruin our GOP streak if he wins the runoff. Chelseay, what are your thoughts about it being a purple district and all of that?
I think it's absolutely a purple district. And I don't think that a Republican who just comes in brand new, hasn't built the relationships, is going to be able to get over the finish line in November. I mean, it's facts. Again, it's no disrespect to any of the candidates, and especially not Brandon. I don't know him, but from what I do know and facts, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work, and he will absolutely end our streak. That seat will be lost. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if you know, I'm pretty much always right. So there you go.
Yeah. And so, I know there's a lot of people that were hammering Tony on certain votes. And what I highly recommend, because the internet it can be a dangerous place, which is really funny, because a lot of people are really, they're wanting to ban TikTok, right? I know I'm kind of going this left field, but they're wanting to ban TikTok, because there's so much misinformation because it's owned by China. But it's like, you won't even bother calling their office and asking why Tony, hasn't, voted a certain way or whatever, right? Like, you're just assuming things, and actually brings me, because, there's, of course, they're always calling him a rhino, that he's voted a certain way, that he voted for this, whatever. But it brings me to my last point. What people need to remember, right? And I'm gonna call out my some of my friends who are incredibly invested and just super passionate about Tony's race, and they have no business because they can't even vote for or against Tony. Which is just so weird to me, that you were so invested in a race that you can't even contribute to. And of course, you can have an opinion about everything, but that doesn't mean your opinion is valid. And so what people need to remember at the end of the day is that Tony is a representative. If you don't know what that means, Google it. A representative for his constituents, not for the Republican Party, not for the RNC, not for the Republican Party of Bexar County or El Paso or whatever, not the crazy alt-right, for his tax-paying voters only. Yes, he runs as a Republican and is a Republican, but his one and only job is to vote his district, which we already said is very purple. Nothing else. It is not super conservative. He is not Chip Roy. He is not Louis Gohmert. He is Tony Gonzalez. He has to vote his district, guys. Like I said, his district. And he has been voting his district consistently, by the way. His district is not hard right, like how some of these people want it so much to be. It's purple leaning red, and folks really need to understand that.
Yeah, no, and I want to, two things before we move on to the house races is this. So, one, when Amy touched on people who are kind of the loudest, can't even vote for Tony. So I want to say that's based on fact, not like, we're just being chismosas. You can look up people's voting records, and we have.
Yeah,
sometimes we do it for funsies. I mean, sometimes we look at FEC reports for funsies. Yes. We're kind of weird. Anyways, the second thing is I want to say and touch on, and we'll move into some Texas House seats, is Tony is the congressman of his district, not congressman for the Republicans. He is doing what he needs to do in those districts, regardless of, whether they're Republican or Democrat. When somebody has an issue and they call his district office, do you really think he asks, hey, can you ask them if they're Democrat or Republican, or if they have voted for me? And that is going to determine if I help them? No, be so for real. And then also too, I also want to tell you guys a quick story, just to show you that Tony has done the work. Right after the tragedy in Uvalde. I'm from Uvalde. My whole family's from Uvalde County. My sister and I went to Uvalde that day. I think it was that day, and we wanted to donate blood because we were a mess. That was a horrible time, right? We drove to Uvalde. It was the very next day, actually, because they were saying that they needed blood. The blood bank was already out, so we're like, okay, let's just go. We're gonna go donate blood. We were looking for a place to donate blood. Uvalde's not a big place. There was lines out the wazoo, and I found out that there was only one truck from the blood bank there. So immediately I thought to myself, okay, who can fix this? We need another, they need more. There's people lined up for miles attempting to give blood, me and my sister being one of them. Right. So I text Tony, and I was like, hey, Tony, I'm in Uvalde. This is a situation. Is there anything that you can do to help them get another, there needs to be another blood bank truck out here. And immediately text me back. And keep in mind, this is during can you imagine how many texts this man was getting? He was like, I'm on it. I'll fix it. That is him working for that county. That is something that he needed, that we needed in that time of need. And I also want to point out that in that time, there was a lot of people that had a lot to say, but Tony was down there in Uvalde, and you may not believe it, you may not think about it, but I guarantee you those people will never forget how he was there for them at that time. So I'm gonna get off that soapbox because I will talk forever. Because I feel passionate about it. I feel all the emotions that I felt that day, with being with my sister, I desperately wanted to give blood. You know what I mean? Right. And we couldn't. So all I had to do was text Tony, and he was gonna figure it out. Anyways, so let's jump into some Texas House seats. Texas House members serve a 2-year term. This election cycle was particularly spicy due to the drama surrounding it. So, Attorney General Ken Paxton was seeking blood against Republicans who voted to impeach him. That's one thing. The second thing was GGA. Shout out to GGA. I'm a big GGA fan. Invested millions into races to unseat incumbent House representatives who voted against school choice vouchers. which are his high priority. And we're not going to get into school choice today, but we're going to jump into one particular race that was very interesting. So, District 121 in San Antonio, the incumbent, Mr. Steve Allison, had been there for 6 years, and he was unseated by Republican Mark LaHood. It was 53-5 to 39.4. This is actually a good race to talk about. Like, hey, GGA was not playing around. He unseated a 6-year Republican. Now, I have nothing against Mr. Steve Allison. I think he's a good guy. Obviously, think Mark LaHood's a good guy. And it's just wild. Like, that's not the only race. The governor literally put millions of dollars into these races to make sure that, you know, homeboys that didn't vote for him, you gotta go. You gotta go. You gotta go, and you're going. I also want to touch, like, I think it's very interesting because there's a lot of consultants that were involved in a lot of these races, and they're probably super, super stoked about their win. Like, hell yeah. But what are the chances, bro? You're never going to get another time a perfect storm where the governor puts millions of dollars into these races. So got to bring them down a little bit. But there were some good races, and at the end of the day, in this particular race, I do feel like the best man won, but that's neither here or there. Amy, any local races you want to touch on?
Yeah, so before I hop into a local race here in El Paso, I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't think it was right for Paxton to go after people who did the right thing, because I don't know who needs to know this, but, you know, Paxton is guilty as hell. And for Abbott, our governor, who I love very dearly, to go after people who voted their district, right? We just talked about that with Tony. They voted their district. That's just my opinion. Abbott and Paxton went after a few other amazing moderate Republicans in the Austin and Dallas area who actually ended up losing the primaries because their opponents also received a lot of money and resources from Abbott. And now there are a lot of consultants who do believe that Republicans will lose their hold on the Texas House in the next 2 to 4 years because of these more, you know, some of them are extreme, more hard right Republicans who are, you know, keep winning these races, but especially who just won the primaries in 2024. But we will see. So El Paso. Now, if you know me, you know that I have a huge bone to pick with the voters here, and this is not a blanket statement. Okay. This is like, this is not a blanket statement. This is like, I'm not going to say it's fact. It's just, well, no, I mean, it is fact. We have one of the lowest voter turnouts ever in the state. It is, I mean, under 6% in the primaries, while other counties, major, you know, large city counties had, they were in the double digits, while we had under 6% voter turnout. Our voters here tend to be a little bit politically uneducated, not well informed, a bit ignorant. The big thing that you need to know here is that name recognition is everything. You don't need to be qualified. You don't need to be experienced. You don't need to be educated or whatever. You just need to get your name out there.
And your gender.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but we're not going to get into that. Yeah. Or are we?
Yeah. There was a race here that was heavily impacted on, I guess, the base of someone's sex, right? So like, there was clearly a better candidate who happened to be a woman, but we may or may not touch on that today. So a Democrat sheriff candidate got the most votes, and you guys want to know why? Because it's not because he was the most qualified. No. He invested most, if not all, of his campaign money on the extra large 5x8 signs and huge banners that literally covered every block in El Paso. I'm not joking. You could not go anywhere without seeing his signs. That being said, even if you were lazy and you didn't leave your house, he had endorsements from what I call the crazy far left politicians such as Beto O'Rourke and Veronica Escobar. Veronica Escobar literally wore like his shirt, his campaign shirt, and was passing out his literature. They both advocated and advertised on his behalf pretty heavily, and his website actually looks pretty good. So if you were bored and you were just like, who is this guy? I keep seeing his signs everywhere, whatever. You know, he had his digital side covered. He did have about 2 or 3 other Democrat candidates running for sheriff, but the other two But the two who were actually the best, in my opinion, to go off into a runoff were Ryan and Bobby, Ryan Urrutia and Bobby Flores. Now, those two were much more better qualified compared to Oscar. Now, El Pasoans vote with what I say, they vote with their eyes. Okay, it's all about either who has a D next to their name or whose name they have seen the most or have just seen at all. Now, Oscar definitely,
or whose gender,
and Oscar definitely knew that.
I'm not gonna let that one go.
No, I know you're not. I know we're gonna have to talk about it at some point. So Oscar definitely knew that. He knew that voters here in El Paso voted with their eyes, and he won the most vote, but he went off into a runoff with Bobby. So my message for you guys: please be informed voters, okay? I have had a lot of friends and family, and actually I had a girlfriend of mine, just last Friday, we were out for lunch and she made the comment, like, it's so hard to be such a well-informed voter nowadays, right? Like, and, you know, it's so hard to do research on people. No, guys, no, it's not. It's really not. If you spend 30 minutes, right, out of your 8 hours that you spend on your phone a day, right? Just 30 minutes that you're already on your phone on a daily basis, you can figure out who is who and who is the best. And if you wanted to, if you really wanted to, you would. It's so vital and so important that you make these informed, that you make an informed vote and not just listen to what people say or just vote for whoever has the most signs. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is that I was actually told by my local Republican Party and several Republican voters, not just locally, but in the state, to vote yes on all the propositions. Now, keep in mind, if you voted in the Democrat primary, you had very different propositions than we did. And so I was told just vote yes on all the propositions. So I went into the booth with that mindset. And I am so glad that I took the time to read each and every single one of them, because there were actually 3 that I voted no on. I voted no on. And later I learned that several of my friends and family who are Republican actually voted no on more than 3. And I think it was like 4 or 5 of them that they voted no on. But they had excellent reasons for their decision. And at the end of the day, all of the propositions passed. And believe it or not, I actually know someone who was convinced that we had a Democrat infiltration, that we had like a Democrat infiltration in our party, because so many Republicans did vote no on a lot of these propositions. But I think that's just proof, guys, that moderates are alive and well and they're voting. They're just not voting enough in the primaries to scare the crazies or to make a sizable difference. That's just my opinion.
To scare the crazies. They scare me. They're crazy. Guys, just to touch really quick on be an informed voter.
Mm-hmm.
So please be an informed voter. You are the reason why candidates have to spend millions of dollars, because guess what? You're the target, the uninformed voter. It is not hard. Like Amy said, and I just, if you're going to take all that time to just get in your car and drive to the poll site, do a little research. It's not hard. And I had some other points, but I'm actually just going to skip them because we actually talked about that way longer than we anticipated. We thought that was going to be a 20-minute tops topic, and it's turned almost into 45. So Amy, what are your last thoughts on that?
Yeah, so actually, quick shout out to those watching. We have Sergio, we have Liza and Vanessa. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. So what does this mean? Right, we're going to close this up. What does this mean for the 2024 general election, guys? Well, I think overall, Chelsea, November is going to be interesting. I think we can all agree on that. And I was actually tuning into another podcast, and it's a bunch of political.
How dare you?
I know, right? I'm so disrespectful. But it's basically a bunch of political consultants, and they said that this November's election, unlike other years, will be a matter of who shows up, not who's done the most grassroots or who has done the most digital advertising or the most commercials. It's just going to be on who gets their people out to vote. But I thought that was a little funny and ironic, because grassroots and texting campaigns are the best ways to get people to get out the vote, but whatever. My message to all of the voters, but specifically to our Latino population, you need to get out and vote. You need to realize how valuable and important you are, not just in our local and state and federal elections, but to society. We can make or break elections. Just remember that. And with that, we will close this part and we are going to get into our Let's Be Real segment, which, by the way, I know we're talking about this again. It is the Selena and Yolanda.
But for good reason.
It is for a good reason, I promise. The Selena and Yolanda, The Secrets Between Them documentary. Now, guys, I know what you're thinking. Didn't you guys already talk about Selena and Yolanda already? Didn't you chismosas already cover that tea? Well, yes, we
Girl,
did.
there was more.
But let me say, I was really shocked because we literally talked about it weeks before the trailer for the documentary came out. So we were like bewildered that we covered it, and then all of a sudden, bam, there's a documentary coming out. So we absolutely had to watch the whole thing more than once, by the way, and then come back and discuss it with you guys. You know, obviously Chelsea has the perspective of being like a big Selena fan, and then me, just kind of an outsider who didn't really care for Selena, didn't really care for Yolanda, then watched the documentary and, you know, was kind of shocked. So Chelsea, you're the diehard Selena fan here, so tell us what you think.
So I wouldn't say I'm a super fan, but I'm definitely a fan. I've been a fan my whole life, as long as I can remember. But let's set the scene here. So much of this documentary is based on interviews with Yolanda's family. So specifically her nieces and nephews, with their inner knowings, their access to her belongings that were put in storage all those years ago. It paints a picture of what we already knew. Yolanda and Selena were close. Selena trusted Yolanda as a part of her inner circle. Selena, or I'm going to quote Yolanda, something she says in the documentary. She says, "I was convicted by public opinion before I went to trial." Okay, homegirl. Yolanda shot Selena. She shot her in the back. So there's no denying that happened. Like, make it make sense. But the question has always been, why did she do it? What happened that morning? What led up to that meeting at the hotel? So cue the documentary. And guys, okay, maybe I am a super fan, but when I saw this documentary, when I tell you, I was on the floor and I actually had to watch it 3 times for my brain to comprehend what was going on. I was, as I like to say, in outer space. So, a couple of points. In this documentary, Abraham is painted as kind of how he's always been painted. I feel like people have always said, you know, Abraham was only interested in his daughter's money, and for legal reasons, this is all jokey jokes. You know, Abraham was always interested in his daughter's money. He tried to profit off of her death, yada, yada, yada. So it does paint him in that light. And going as far as Yolanda saying that she feared for her life. She thought that he was going to hurt her, right? So a story that has been told from the very beginning is that Yolanda was a crazed fan. She was stealing money from Selena. Selena fired her, and that's why she shot her, right? She lost it. She was like, ain't nobody gonna have you, boo-boo, just me. Shot her in the back. Well, this documentary brings to light some of the things that kind of like we've never known, right? It touches on a lot of things that don't, you know, before I get into those, I want to say she's guilty. She shot her. There's no denying it. She shot her in the back. I 100% believe in the death penalty. I think she should have got the death penalty. I said it, right? Now, were there things that happened that we didn't know? Abso-freaking-lutely, bro. So let's start off with they fire Selena, right? They say you're stealing money, you gotta go. But they didn't actually fire her. And this plays out in the documentary. They kept her on because they wanted her to finish opening Selena's boutiques in Mexico. So that leads you to one place, right? But Yolanda was like basically like, no, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna quit. She was a nurse by trade. I'm gonna go be a nurse in San Antonio, yada yada yada. Well, this documentary and what's crazy is some of these things, like, you'll probably think, oh, well, that's her family, they'll say whatever to make her sound good. There is actually some physical evidence of the things that they are saying. You know, they said that Selena quote unquote fired Yolanda but kept her on, and Selena was still in constant contact with Yolanda because that was her best friend, and she didn't want her to actually go. And they actually play recordings after the date where Yolanda was confronted by Abraham, of Selena just calling and leaving messages on Yolanda's, the old school voicemail tape recorders, wanting to talk to her, trying to connect with her. And they were still, from what it seems, very much close, right? Um, they say that Yolanda stole money. I don't know if that's true or not true, but in this documentary, with her family, her niece actually worked in the boutique, and she states, well, how could she steal money? There was no money. Nobody was making money, right? So that's one. And then, well, here's the juice. You watch a whole episode and you're like, well, what's the secret? Yolanda alleges that Selena was having an affair with a doctor in Mexico, and Yolanda was helping her keep that secret. And she says, like, hey, yeah, there were checks that I wrote, but actually Selena told me to write them to myself, and then she was cashing them. Now, I don't know if I believe that part. Sounds kind of sketch. However, the doctor does exist. And in the very beginning, right after Selena's death, he said, oh, no, we didn't have an affair. Well, 20 years later, he says, oh, yeah, we did. I loved her very much, and she loved me very much. And there was allegedly, supposedly some proof in that. Anyways, so guys, it is juicy, to say the least. Like, it is really wild. You're probably going to have to watch it more than once, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, you're going to have to watch it at least twice, just because there's a lot of details in it that you're like, oh, this is really weird. And this isn't, for sure, for sure, Yolanda killed Selena.
2 + 2 is not 12.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to be thinking.
It's just some weird stuff. But like, so I actually hyper fixated on something very specifically, and I'm if I'm going to be honest, so obviously for legal purposes, everything I'm about to say is a big fat joke and just chisme. But the one person who benefited from Selena's death was her dad. I am 100% on that bandwagon. Like, there's a lot of love for Abraham though online, right? Like on social media, right? Like, it was his birthday recently, and if you look at the comments, right, like there's a lot of people who are like, oh, happy birthday, Abraham, da da da. Like, there's just a lot of people who show him a lot of love. But let's just put it this way. Okay, let's just put it into perspective. Let's just say that only 50%, right? Hell, even 30% of what the documentary shared was the full truth. Abraham would have been in a better position financially and politically if his daughter was dead. First of all, this is a fact, right? She is more famous in death than she ever was in life. We say this often, so just think about that. But secondly, he no longer had to run things by Selena. He no longer needed her signature. He no longer needed permission to use her face for brand deals. He no longer needed to maneuver this, what we, in the documentary, you see this stubborn girl who was this free spirit and had free will, who kind of fought against her dad in a lot of situations. He no longer had to fight with her or argue with her about anything. He no longer had to convince her to do what he wanted, right, her to do. He would make all this money off of her as he so well pleased. And he made Chris Perez, which is Selena's husband, and Chris is Abraham's son-in-law, to sign all executive rights to her name, her music, her photos, her story. He literally, like, how do you own everything from, that's just crazy to me. Like, her voice, he owns everything that is attached to Selena. And he actually sued Chris later on, by the way, for writing like a book. It was like a biography. It was like a memoir. And of course, Selena was in this memoir. So, he literally sued Chris, right? And Abraham made a movie. He released music. He would benefit off of her legacy solely. So if it's true that he was so controlling, that he was suffocating, and he lacked serious boundaries, you know what, Chelsea? So and I think you and I have talked about this. I'm not sure if you or anyone watching right now, if you guys have seen the movie I Want to Dance with Somebody. It's a movie about Whitney Houston. But Abraham gave me serious John Russell vibes. And that's actually Whitney's dad, by the way, for those who didn't know. So he controlled Whitney, right? He told her who she could and couldn't hire. She signed all the papers behind her back, forced her to go on tours after he blew all of her money, and then turn around and sued her for $100 million because he felt she owed him more money. Like, the freaking audacity, right? But and while John was clearly a real piece of work, right? I think Abraham is more, how do you say this? He was a little bit more threatening, right? He was more cunning. He was more capable, and I'll leave it at that. But I think both fathers and both of these legendary female singers were only looking out really for themselves, for their own interests, their own wants and needs, and especially their own wallets. Absolutely nothing else mattered, not even their daughters. And these girls were just a means to an end. It's just the pony that they would ride that would lead them to the stream of wealth. But I don't know what you think, Chelsea.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that, and we talked about this, is something to note is in this story that is what, 30 years old at this point, Abraham has always been a villain. People, I mean, he gets love, but he gets hate. He gets a lot of hate. And I think a lot of that, watch the documentary, and yeah, I'm pretty sure some of the stuff is over exaggerated, but you kind of see, Selena was a free spirit. Selena wanted to do Selena. I mean, think about her marriage. Her
Right.
dad, it happened just like it happened in the movie, right? Like the general idea. She ran away to get married to Chris Perez. Her dad found out on the radio. That actually happened. He
Yeah.
has confirmed it. So think about it. Why would she do that? Why would she feel compelled to run away to marry this man when she's freaking Selena? Like, so there has to be some truth to some of these things. I mean,
Right.
we got to use our common sense, but I think that, it's a lot. And then he's still making money on her today. I mean, they just, I just saw recently, and I kind of want one. There's a boombox, a Selena boombox that they're selling.
Oh,
And it's,
interesting.
you know what the brand, I don't know what the brand is, but they make boom boxes, and they do different brands with different artists, and they have one for Selena. This just happened. It was just released. He's still making money off of her to this day.
Well, and I'm
So
actually curious. Do you remember that MAC Cosmetics had like a Selena lipstick, like the legendary red Selena lipstick? I wonder if he made money off of that. I'm pretty sure he did.
he did, because I'm pretty sure that the sister, so Suzette, her older sister, was posting a lot about it. I think that they were working together with Mac the family. But I mean, something also I want to note, like I know that was her family, that was her dad, that was her mom's, and she would probably want her family to be taken care of. But I do think it's really shitty that right after her death, her dad went to her husband, who she loved dearly, or so we think, right? We don't know. And said, you have to sign over the rights. Like, you're not going to get anything from her. Like, bro, she's dead. She just died.
Right.
Like, mourn. Also, something to note in the documentary, it touches a little bit on the fact that the cops didn't, they had the standoff. Selena was shot. There was a standoff. A homegirl, Yolanda, stayed in the parking lot for like 17 hours, talking about how, she was going to bang herself, but she didn't. The cops were like mum, because they're like, oh, let's investigate, let's see what happened, and all this stuff, because there's a lot of crazy stuff in the documentary. They talk about that hotel room and what led up to it, but they also touch on the fact that they were purposely not trying to say anything, and Abraham had a press conference literally that day and was like, yeah, my daughter's dead, Yolanda killed her, Yolanda was a crazy fam, she stole money. Like, that's crazy, guys. Like, that is crazy.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll add, and then we can close out, is that guys, if you watch it, Yolanda definitely lied in the documentary about certain things. But even if we were to say that just 10% of what she said was true, that's still pretty shocking. And the only thing I'm gonna say is Selena having a whole affair, right, with this doctor in Mexico, and like no one really, in my opinion, no one really cared or batted an eye or talked about it, right? Like, it wasn't anywhere. No one really cared. And I'm not sure why, because I feel like if it was like a male artist who cheated on his wife, it would be everywhere, right? Like, if he died and then he became this, I just feel like it would have been a huge deal. So I did think that was pretty funny and entertaining. But yeah, I'll close out with that.
All right. So once again, we do not have a small business shout out for today's episode. So we're going to ask our viewers and listeners to please send us a DM or email us at info@amigasunplugged.com. So send us your Latino and Hispanic-owned businesses. We want to see you on our podcast, and we want to shout you out. So please send them our way.
Y'all get ready for our next episode, which is going to be on the southern border crisis, how it's affecting everyone, including the Latino community.
And for our Let's Be Real segment, we actually decided it's going to be a surprise. And we'll announce it on our socials later. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. Mark your calendars for Thursday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. All right. And before that, in April, look out for our 6-month anniversary audio episode. If you're watching this later on YouTube or listening on a streaming platform, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow.
Everything sounds great. See you later, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Have a blessed night. Adios.
Have a good night, guys. Bye.